What if the glittering stars of Hollywood's golden age weren't all blessed with razor-sharp minds to match their dazzling beauty? Behind the carefully crafted studio images and beneath those iconic hairstyles, some of classic cinema's most beloved actresses struggled with profound limitations, not just on-screen as characters, but off-camera as themselves. Today, we pull back the velvet curtain to reveal which legendary leading ladies, according to their closest confidants, directors, and even their own decisions, displayed a startling lack of common sense that ultimately shaped or sabotaged their storied careers. Jane Mansfield. With a reported IQ of 163 and fluency in 5 languages, Jane Mansfield possessed all the intellectual tools for greatness. Yet, she made the perplexing choice to base her entire career around the persona of the ditzy blonde, embracing the stereotype so convincingly that even powerful studio executives believed the act was real. The tragedy wasn't her lack of intelligence, but how Mansfield weaponized faux foolishness to ascend the Hollywood ladder, only to have it collapse beneath her. From the moment she exploded onto the scene in the 1950s, Mansfield captivated tabloids with scandalous stunts, wardrobe malfunctions, and champagne-filled bathtubs. Her outrageous antics overshadowed any hope of being taken seriously. When starring in films like The Girl Can't Help It, critics dismissed her performances as exaggerated parodies. Her once promising career quickly devolved into a series of increasingly desperate publicity stunts. Mansfield's personal life mirrored her professional choices. Her marriage to bodybuilder Mickey Hargitay became a circus of public spectacle. According to those who worked closely with her, she'd often arrive at important meetings without reading contracts, signing whatever was placed before her with a girlish giggle. Jane thought playing dumb was her ticket to the top, recalled one former agent. She never realized it was actually her express elevator to the bottom. Perhaps most telling was her bizarre association with Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan. This publicity stunt backfired spectacularly, with mainstream America recoiling from her increasingly erratic behavior. Studio executives who might have overlooked her other eccentricities found this particular alliance a bridge too far. Overnight, Mansfield went from A-list to nearly unemployable. At the height of her fame, Mansfield rejected a prestigious Broadway revival simply because it didn't guarantee television exposure. She gravitated towards sensationalism, appearing in incoherent, low-budget European films that hastened her career decline. Her accidental death in 1967 immortalized not a brilliant woman trapped by Hollywood's narrow vision, but a tragic figure who clung so tightly to the dumb blonde caricature that she couldn't escape when the tide turned. Esther Williams. Esther Williams glittered as Hollywood's million-dollar mermaid, dazzling 1940s and 1950s audiences with water ballets and intricate swimming choreography. Yet beyond the shimmering surface, Williams showed remarkably little interest in the inner workings of her fame or the swiftly changing film industry. In her memoir, The $1 Million Mermaid, she confessed that she rarely read scripts fully before arriving on set, even quipping, "If it doesn't involve a pool, I'm not interested." Directors like Charles Walters often had to craft scenes centered entirely around her physical strengths, minimizing any requirement for nuanced acting. One frustrated director reportedly said, "Working with Esther is like directing a beautiful fish, spectacular in water, but floundering on land." Her cavalier approach to acting extended to her business affairs. Williams signed contracts without scrutiny, often discovering unfavorable terms only after filming concluded. When MGM paired her with accountants to manage her earnings, she famously dismissed them, stating she had no head for numbers. This casual approach to finances would haunt her later career. Her personal life mirrored her professional indifference. Williams married 4 times, most notably to actor Fernando Lamas, who demanded she abandon her career entirely. When asked in a 1984 interview why she agreed to such a devastating professional sacrifice, she simply replied, "He was strong. I liked it strongly." This startling lack of self-advocacy shocked even her closest friends. Williams's entrepreneurial ventures fared no better. Her swimwear line, launched with much fanfare in 1957, collapsed within 3 years due to poor management and ineffective marketing strategies. Unlike savvy businesswomen like Elizabeth Arden or Helena Rubinstein, Williams had little interest in understanding the business that bore her name. "I just wanted to see pretty girls in my suits," she said when questioned about the company's bankruptcy. By the late 1960s, Williams found herself financially insecure and struggling to regain relevance. As swimming spectaculars fell out of fashion, she failed to reinvent herself in an industry that rewarded constant evolution. While contemporaries like Doris Day transitioned to television and Broadway, Williams remained stubbornly fixed in the past, refusing roles that didn't showcase her in water. "Esther simply couldn't imagine herself beyond the pool," lamented a former co-star. "Her inability to adapt was her greatest limitation." Jean Arthur. With her signature husky voice and expressive eyes, Jean Arthur became one of Hollywood's most beloved leading ladies in the 1930s and 1940s. She shined in classics like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Yet, despite her undeniable talent, Arthur spent much of her career running from fame, the press, and even her own success. Arthur's intense fear of public speaking and social interaction was well documented. But beyond mere shyness, she displayed an almost self-sabotaging aversion to Hollywood's inner workings. She avoided interviews, refused public appearances, and rarely engaged with studio executives. Director Frank Capra once described how she would slip out through back exits and disappear between projects, making it nearly impossible to reach her. "Working with Jean was like trying to direct a ghost," he remarked. "Half the time, we weren't sure she'd actually show up for filming." Her anxiety often disrupted productions in ways that mystified her colleagues. While filming The More the Merrier, Arthur reportedly had breakdowns over minor details like lighting and wardrobe choices. She insisted on filming without crew members watching, forcing director George Stevens to rebuild entire sets to accommodate her discomfort. These demands added thousands of dollars to the production budget and delayed shooting by weeks. Despite earning an Oscar nomination for the film, she later dismissed the experience as miserable. Even more baffling were the roles she turned down. She passed on His Girl Friday, It's a Wonderful Life, and several scripts written specifically for her. When asked why she rejected these potentially career-defining projects, she offered vague explanations about not connecting with the character or simply not responding to calls from her agent. Industry insiders wondered if Arthur understood the concept of career momentum at all. In 1944, Columbia Pictures offered her a contract extension with terms that would have made her one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood. To everyone's shock, she rejected it in favor of semi-retirement, with no clear career plan. "Jean seemed allergic to success," noted one studio executive. "The closer she got to true stardom, the harder she worked to sabotage it." Arthur's behavior wasn't merely eccentric. It reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how careers in Hollywood functioned. While her contemporaries like Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis strategically built their legacies, Arthur seemed content to drift, allowing potentially transformative opportunities to slip through her fingers. Her talent was undeniable, but her business acumen was virtually non-existent. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was sultry, enigmatic, and commanding, mesmerizing audiences worldwide with performances in The Blue Angel and Morocco. Her image was meticulously crafted under the guidance of director Joseph von Sternberg. Yet, beyond the camera's gaze, Dietrich orchestrated a far more enduring performance than any she portrayed on screen. She cloaked herself in strategic ignorance, often pretending simplicity, even stupidity, to navigate an industry that desired her to be alluring, but silent. Paramount studio records from the 1930s reveal that Dietrich would frequently pretend not to understand English during contract negotiations, despite being fully fluent in several languages. When challenged about important clauses, she would furrow her brow and ask for translations, gaining valuable time to consider her position. This calculated performance of confusion often resulted in executives explaining terms in simpler language, inadvertently revealing their bottom line. When questioned on political matters during the rise of Nazism in her native Germany, Dietrich would demur, claiming ignorance of world affairs. "I am just an actress," she would say with a dramatic shrug. Yet privately, she was actively helping Jewish friends escape Europe and donating substantial sums to resistance efforts. This disconnect between her public persona and private actions revealed a woman who understood that playing dumb often served her interests better than displaying her intelligence. She allowed male directors to control her lighting, blocking, and even line delivery, building a facade of passive compliance that made her appear malleable. Directors who worked with her repeatedly, however, noted that she mysteriously always got her way in the end. Marlene had a genius for appearing to surrender while actually conquering, remarked director Billy Wilder. By the time you realized what had happened, the scene was shot exactly as she wanted it. Privately, she was anything but compliant. Her letters, now preserved in the Berlin State Library, reveal a razor-sharp intellect and keen strategic mind. Men are frightened of intelligent women, she once confided to a journalist. They prefer a whisper to a sentence. This philosophy guided her career choices and public image for decades. This calculated naivety came at a high price. As the studio system began to collapse in the 1950s, Dietrich found herself with few alternatives. Unlike contemporaries such as Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn, she had not positioned herself as a producer, director, or writer. Her decades-long performance of intellectual submission had become so convincing that even as the industry evolved, she remained typecast as a glamorous object rather than a creative force. With no fallback position, she embarked on a career as a touring singer, draped in sequins, and crooning nostalgic standards to audiences who remembered her cinematic glory. But the film world had moved on, and Dietrich's strategy of strategic ignorance had left her without the skills to adapt to a changing industry. Marilyn Monroe. Despite her breathless innocence in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot, Marilyn Monroe's iconic dumb blonde persona masked a woman who ran her own production unit, studied literature and politics, devoured method acting theory, and kept detailed business diaries. Yet her personal demons and industry pressures continually undermined her attempts to be taken seriously. Monroe's private library contained over 400 books, including works by Dostoevsky, Freud, and Joyce. She studied with acting coach Lee Strasberg and aspired to tackle challenging dramatic roles. However, these intellectual pursuits remained largely hidden from the public and studio executives who preferred her in comedic, lightweight fare. "I don't mind being in a comedy," she once told a reporter, "but I'd like to be in a good one." Studio executives deliberately cultivated Monroe's simplistic image, reducing her to a cartoonish sex symbol despite her efforts to grow as an artist. When she attempted to discuss script changes or character motivations, male directors often dismissed her input. Director Billy Wilder, despite creating some of her most successful films, frequently belittled her intelligence publicly, once remarking, "I have discussed this with my doctor and my psychiatrist, and they tell me I'm too old and too rich to go through this again." Her struggles with mental health and substance abuse led to destructive patterns, chronically arriving late to sets and forgetting lines. These behavior patterns reinforced the industry's perception of her as intellectually limited, creating a vicious cycle. The more she was treated as incapable, the more her insecurities flared, leading to self-medication and further professional problems. As her fame grew, Monroe's ability to distinguish reality from fantasy seemed to diminish. She cycled through failed marriages, tumultuous affairs, and increasingly relied on pills to function. Despite establishing Marilyn Monroe Productions, a revolutionary move for an actress in the 1950s, she struggled to leverage her business acumen consistently, often sabotaging opportunities through self-destructive behaviors. Her final film, The Misfits, revealed the tragic gap between her aspirations and capabilities. Written by her then-husband Arthur Miller, the role was designed to showcase her dramatic range. Yet during filming, Monroe's emotional fragility and substance abuse problems rendered her nearly unworkable. She required 60 takes for simple scenes and frequently forgot entire passages of dialogue. Director John Huston later confessed, "She had moments of brilliance, followed by hours of complete disorientation." By the end of her life, the gap between Monroe's intellectual aspirations and her capacity to fulfill them had grown painfully wide, making her one of Hollywood's most tragic figures, a woman smart enough to understand her own exploitation, but unable to escape the image that consumed her. Her death in 1962 came just as she was beginning to demand more complex roles, leaving unanswered the question of whether she might have eventually broken free from the limitations that defined her career. Betty Grable. Known as the G.I. Dream Girl, who played dumb to land a man, Betty Grable was actually the highest-paid woman in America in 1943. Her seemingly airheaded on-screen persona masked a shrewd businesswoman who negotiated contract clauses that tied her salary directly to box office grosses, an unheard-of arrangement at the time. Grable's famous million-dollar legs became her trademark, but they also became golden handcuffs. Studio publicity departments focused so intensely on her physical attributes that Grable herself began to believe the hype. When offered dramatic roles that might have showcased her acting abilities, she frequently turned them down, stating, "Nobody wants to see Betty Grable cry." This rigid self-perception prevented her from evolving when musical comedies fell out of fashion. Her fierce dedication to her pin-up image ultimately limited her artistic growth. She refused challenging dramatic roles, believing audiences only wanted to see her legs and smile. "I'm a song and dance girl," she famously said. "That's all I ever wanted to be." This narrow self-definition became increasingly problematic as the 1950s brought more naturalistic acting styles and complex female characters to the screen. Her personal life reflected similar patterns of limiting beliefs. Despite her business acumen in negotiating studio contracts, she surrendered financial control to her husband, bandleader Harry James, who gambled away much of her fortune on horse racing. By some accounts, James lost over $3 million of Grable's earnings at the track. When confronted about these losses, she reportedly shrugged and said, "Easy come, easy go." This casual attitude toward her hard-earned wealth shocked her financial advisors, who had witnessed her fierce negotiations with studio executives. As younger stars emerged in the 1950s, Grable found herself typecast and increasingly irrelevant. Rather than adapting to changing tastes, she retreated, turning down transformative roles that might have extended her career. When offered the dramatic lead in All About Eve, Grable declined, saying, "That's not what my fans expect from me." This failure to recognize shifting audience preferences accelerated her decline. By the mid-1950s, 20th Century Fox declined to renew her contract. Grable, who had been the studio's top box office draw for over a decade, seemed genuinely surprised by this development. She had failed to notice the changing landscape of post-war cinema and the rising popularity of actresses like Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly, who represented a more sophisticated feminine ideal. Her inability to imagine herself beyond the narrow confines of her established persona ultimately rendered her a relic of a bygone era. When she attempted a comeback in the 1960s, audiences had moved on, and Grable found herself performing in small venues to diminishing crowds. "Betty couldn't understand why the world changed," remarked one former co-star. "She thought her legs would be enough forever." Lucille Ball. While immortalized as the dizzy redhead Lucy Ricardo on I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball was actually the first woman to head a major studio, pioneered rerun syndication, and masterminded the multi-camera sitcom format that revolutionized television production. Yet, despite her remarkable business achievements, Ball struggled with crippling insecurities that led to questionable personal and professional choices. Ball's greatest weakness was her blind loyalty to troubled husband Desi Arnaz. Despite his chronic alcoholism and infidelity, she continuously protected and enabled him, even as his behavior threatened their empire. Studio executives and close friends repeatedly warned her about Arnaz's destructive habits, but Ball refused to acknowledge the severity of the situation. When executives urged her to replace him, she refused, saying, "Without him, there's no show." This emotional dependence cost her millions and years of unnecessary suffering. The contradiction between Ball's razor-sharp business instincts and her self-destructive personal choices mystified those around her. She could negotiate complex production deals and pioneer revolutionary filming techniques, yet seemed incapable of recognizing Arnaz's manipulation and abuse. "Lucy could run a studio but couldn't manage her own marriage," noted longtime friend Vivian Vance. She saw everything clearly except Desi. Her perfectionism often crossed into counterproductive territory. She would demand dozens of retakes for minor scenes, exhausting her cast and crew. These obsessive tendencies increased production costs significantly and created tension on set. As she aged, her insistence on playing increasingly younger characters verged on delusional, alienating audiences who might have embraced her natural evolution. By the late 1960s, her refusal to play age-appropriate roles made her later television attempts seem strained and artificial. After her divorce from Arnaz in 1960, Ball married comedian Gary Morton, who many colleagues described as intellectually unsuited to manage her career. Yet she insisted on giving him significant control over her business decisions, often overriding more experienced advisors. These choices gradually diminished her once mighty entertainment empire until, by the 1970s, she was reduced to appearing in poorly conceived special programs that tarnished her legacy. Perhaps most telling was Ball's inability to recognize when to step away from the spotlight. Unlike contemporaries who gracefully transitioned to producing or directing, she clung to her on-screen persona well past its expiration date. Her final television effort, Life with Lucy, was so poorly received that it was canceled after just 8 episodes. The woman who had once revolutionized television couldn't see that her creative well had run dry. Ball's story represents a unique paradox. A woman with extraordinary business acumen who repeatedly sabotaged herself through emotional blindness and insecurity. Lucy understood television better than anyone, remarked a former network executive. She just never understood herself. Judy Holiday. Renowned for playing Billy Dawn in Born Yesterday, Judy Holiday was actually a Mensa member with a reported IQ over 160. She was quick-witted under HUAC questioning and wrote her own nightclub material. However, her brilliant mind was often at odds with her emotional intelligence and professional judgment. Holiday's breakthrough role in Born Yesterday was a masterclass in intelligent acting. She portrayed a seemingly dim-witted woman who reveals unexpected depths, a performance that won her an Academy Award. The irony was that in real life, Holiday seemed determined to make career choices that undermined her own potential. Despite her intellectual gifts, she repeatedly allowed herself to be typecast, rarely challenging the dumb blonde roles that made her famous but limited her range. When offered dramatic parts that could have showcased her versatility, she frequently declined, citing insecurity and fear of failure. Director George Cukor, who championed her early career, expressed frustration at her reluctance to stretch artistically. Judy had the talent to be another Grable, he reportedly said, but she was terrified of failure, so she kept playing it safe. This reluctance kept her perpetually underestimated in Hollywood. Studio executives, unaware of her genius-level IQ, offered her increasingly shallow comedic roles. By the mid-1950s, her career had stalled, with critics noting that her performances had become repetitive and predictable. When questioned about this decline, Holiday blamed the industry rather than examining her own resistance to change. Her personal relationships revealed similar contradictions. Though sharp enough to outmaneuver McCarthy-era investigators during the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, where she famously played dumb while offering shrewdly calculated responses, she maintained damaging romantic entanglements with men who exploited her financially and emotionally. Friends often expressed bewilderment at how someone so intelligent could make such poor choices in her private life. Perhaps most telling was her relationship with jazz musician Gerry Mulligan, who struggled with addiction issues throughout their time together. Despite her analytical mind, Holiday seemed incapable of applying logical thinking to her romantic choices. She continued supporting Mulligan through repeated relapses and broken promises, unable to extricate herself from the toxic relationship. Holiday's career was cut short by breast cancer at age 43, leaving many to wonder what she might have accomplished had she fully embraced her intellectual potential and pushed beyond the restrictive boundaries she accepted. Her story remains one of Hollywood's most poignant examples of how even extraordinary intelligence doesn't guarantee wise decisions. Joan Blondell. As one of Warner Bros.' most reliable performers during the 1930s, Joan Blondell specialized in wise-cracking yet gullible chorus girls. Her characters often seemed easily duped or manipulated, creating a public perception that carried over into assumptions about her real personality. The studio cultivated this image, with publicity materials emphasizing her beauty while downplaying her considerable intellect. Behind the scenes, however, Blondell was an expert at breaking studio loan-out clauses to raise her salary and a prolific memoirist. Studio documentation reveals that executives frequently underestimated her during contract negotiations, only to find themselves agreeing to terms that heavily favored the actress. Joan knew exactly how far she could push, a former Warner Bros. Legal advisor recalled. She'd play dumb during the talks, asking seemingly naive questions that were actually setting traps. By the time they realized what happened, she'd already gotten what she wanted. This strategy served her well during the rigid studio system era, but as Hollywood evolved, Blondell found herself trapped by her own clever manipulation. After years of presenting herself as intellectually limited, producers and casting directors couldn't imagine her in substantial dramatic roles. Despite her desire to tackle more challenging material, she remained typecast as the brassy, somewhat dim sidekick. Her autobiographical writings, published posthumously, revealed a woman with keen observations about Hollywood's power dynamics and gender politics. She wrote eloquently about the sacrifices women made for success in the industry, noting, "We learned to play stupid because men rewarded it. The tragedy was how many of us forgot we were playing." Blondell navigated the treacherous waters of the studio system by strategically deploying her on-screen persona in real business situations, appearing to be exactly what men expected while quietly securing her financial future. This approach brought short-term gains but long-term creative limitations, as she found herself increasingly unable to break free from the character she'd so convincingly portrayed. By the 1960s, Blondell was appearing primarily in supporting roles, often playing variations of her earlier characters. The industry that had once underestimated her to her advantage now simply overlooked her. Her career became a cautionary tale about the dangers of playing into stereotypes, even strategically. Sometimes the mask becomes impossible to remove. Jean Harlow. Before there was Monroe or Mansfield, there was the original platinum blonde, Jean Harlow. Her on-screen characters in films like Red-Headed Woman and Dinner at 8 portrayed scheming but intellectually limited women, creating an enduring stereotype that would influence Hollywood for decades. What few realized was that Harlow was a voracious reader who regularly pushed MGM writers to deliver sharper dialogue. Director Howard Hawks noted that Harlow mastered the difficult timing of rapid-fire comedy with an ease that belied significant analytical skill and practice. She understood rhythm and pacing better than most writers, one MGM script supervisor reportedly claimed. She'd come in with pages marked up with notations about cadence and emphasis. Nothing about her approach to performance was accidental or unplanned. Despite this intellectual engagement with her craft, Harlow allowed the studio to promote her as little more than a sex symbol. MGM publicity materials focused exclusively on her physical attributes, with press releases describing her as more interested in clothes than books, despite her substantial private library. Her personal life reflected a similar contradiction. In public, she played the carefree party girl, but friends knew her as thoughtful and often melancholic. Her diary entries, now preserved in private collections, reveal a woman grappling with existential questions about fame and identity. "I wonder sometimes if Jean Harlow is eating Jean Harlow alive," she wrote in 1935. "I created her, but now she seems to be creating me." Harlow's relationship with her domineering mother, known professionally as Mama Jean, further complicated her public image. Mama Jean negotiated contracts and managed her daughter's career with an iron fist, often making decisions that prioritized immediate financial gain over long-term career development. Harlow, despite her intelligence, deferred to her mother in business matters, allowing Mama Jean to keep her in a perpetual state of financial and emotional dependency. Despite her brief career, cut short by her untimely death at 26, Harlow established a blueprint that many actresses would follow: use the dumb blonde character as cover, while cultivating real influence over her projects and image. This strategy brought her fame and fortune, but ultimately limited her artistic growth. As she confided to a co-star shortly before her death, "I've spent so long playing dumb that I'm afraid I might actually be becoming what I pretend to be." Clara Bow. Known as the original It Girl, Clara Bow captivated audiences with her vibrant energy and sexual appeal during the silent film era. Her expressive face and natural charisma made her one of the biggest box office draws of the 1920s. Yet, behind her meteoric rise lay a profound naivete about the business of Hollywood that would ultimately lead to her downfall. Raised in poverty in Brooklyn, Bow had little formal education and entered the film industry with no understanding of contracts or financial management. Studio executives took advantage of this ignorance, signing her to exploitative deals that paid her far less than her male counterparts, despite her enormous popularity. While contemporaries like Gloria Swanson negotiated ownership percentages and approval rights, Bow simply signed whatever was put in front of her. "Clara couldn't read a contract to save her life," recalled a former Paramount executive. "She'd ask, 'Where do I sign?' without questioning the terms. We'd joke that we could have her sign away her firstborn and she wouldn't notice." This lack of business acumen extended to her personal finances. Despite earning millions during her career, Bow spent lavishly without saving or investing. She purchased multiple homes, expensive cars, and funded an entourage of hangers-on who exploited her generosity. When confronted about her spending habits, she reportedly said, "Money's for spending, ain't it? I'll just make more in my next picture." The transition to sound films posed another challenge for Bow. While she had a suitable voice for talkies, her Brooklyn accent was pronounced, and she struggled with memorizing dialogue. Unlike more adaptable stars, Bow resisted voice and diction training, insisting that audiences would accept her as she was. This resistance to professional development accelerated her career decline. Perhaps most damaging was Bow's inability to understand Hollywood's social politics. She spoke openly about her humble origins and sexual freedom at a time when studios were desperately trying to clean up the industry's image. Her candid interviews about her love life scandalized the studio heads and alienated increasingly conservative audiences. By the early 1930s, Bow's career was in free fall. Plagued by scandals, financial problems, and mental health issues, she retreated from public life before the age of 30. While her contemporaries transitioned to character roles or production work, Bow seemed unable to envision a future beyond her fading stardom. She spent her final decades in seclusion, a Hollywood cautionary tale about the dangers of beauty without business sense. Veronica Lake. With her peekaboo hairstyle and sultry persona, Veronica Lake became one of the most recognizable stars of the 1940s. Her performances in film noir classics like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia established her as the quintessential femme fatale. Yet Lake's inability to understand studio politics or manage her own career led to one of Hollywood's most dramatic falls from grace. Lake's infamous difficulty on set alienated colleagues and directors alike. She frequently arrived late, struggled with alcoholism, and refused to cooperate with publicity departments. Most damaging was her reputation for treating crew members with contempt. Veronica seemed to believe that stardom entitled her to behave however she wanted, remarked director Renee Claire. She couldn't understand that films are collaborative efforts. This attitude might have been tolerated if Lake had delivered consistent box office returns, but her popularity began waning in the mid-1940s. Rather than adjusting her approach, she doubled down on problematic behavior. When Paramount executives suggested she diversify her roles, she dismissively replied, "People want to see the hair and the attitude. That's all they care about." This stubborn refusal to evolve proved catastrophic. By 1948, Paramount had terminated her contract. Lake seemed genuinely shocked by this development, unable to comprehend that her star power had diminished. "I'll just sign with another studio," she reportedly told friends. "They're all dying to have me." However, her reputation for difficulty had spread throughout the industry, and no major studio would take the risk. Lake's financial decisions reflected similar short-sightedness. Despite earning substantial sums during her peak years, she failed to save or invest wisely. She purchased an expensive airplane despite having no pilot's license and opened a nightclub with no business experience. Both ventures failed spectacularly, draining her already diminishing resources. As her career collapsed, Lake's alcoholism intensified. By the early 1950s, she was appearing in low-budget films that exploited her fading fame. Unlike contemporaries such as Joan Crawford, who reinvented themselves for television, Lake seemed incapable of adapting to changing media landscapes. When offered television roles, she dismissed them as beneath her, failing to recognize the medium's growing importance. Her final years were marked by poverty and obscurity. In 1962, a reporter found her working as a cocktail waitress in a Manhattan bar, a far cry from her days as one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars. When asked about her dramatic downfall, Lake displayed the same lack of self-awareness that had characterized her career. "Hollywood is fickle," she said, never acknowledging her own role in her professional demise. Rita Hayworth. Marketed as the love goddess, Rita Hayworth became one of the most glamorous stars of the 1940s through performances in films like Gilda and CoverGirl. Her famous hair flip in Gilda became an iconic moment in cinema history. Yet despite her enormous popularity, Hayworth displayed a startling lack of agency in her career and personal life that ultimately undermined her long-term prospects. Born Margarita Cancino, Hayworth underwent a painful transformation to become marketable to mainstream American audiences. She endured electrolysis to raise her hairline and dyed her naturally black hair red to appear less ethnic. When asked why she allowed such radical changes, she simply stated, "I did what I was told." This passive acceptance of others' decisions became a pattern that defined her career. Unlike contemporaries who fought for better roles and contract terms, Hayworth rarely questioned the parts assigned to her. Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn notoriously controlled every aspect of her career and personal life, going so far as to tap her phones and have her followed. Rather than resisting this invasive control, Hayworth accepted it as the price of stardom. "You don't argue with success," she once remarked, seemingly unaware that her contemporaries were doing exactly that and gaining more creative freedom as a result. Her personal relationships reflected the same troubling pattern. Her 5 marriages, including high-profile unions with Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, were characterized by her deferral to dominant male partners. Friends noted that Hayworth seemed to have no sense of self outside of these relationships, adopting the interests, opinions, and even speech patterns of her current husband. Rita never knew who she was, recalled director Vincent Sherman. She became whoever she thought you wanted her to be. This malleability made her an easy target for financial exploitation. Managers and husbands repeatedly mishandled her money, leaving her financially insecure despite decades as a top box office draw. Perhaps most damaging was Hayworth's unwillingness to fight for her artistic legacy. While stars like Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn carefully selected projects that would showcase their talents, Hayworth appeared in increasingly mediocre films that squandered her gifts. By the mid-1950s, her career was in decline, yet she made no effort to transition to television or seek more challenging roles. In her later years, Hayworth's cognitive decline from undiagnosed Alzheimer's disease was initially attributed to alcoholism, delaying proper treatment. Even in this final tragedy, she remained passive, allowing others to define her condition rather than seeking comprehensive medical care. When she died in 1987, obituaries celebrated her beauty and famous roles, but noted the profound waste of potential that characterized her career. These silver screen legends proved that in Hollywood, perception often eclipsed reality. If these stories of ambition, image, and vulnerability captivated you, smash that like button, share this deep dive with fellow film buffs, and subscribe for more untold tales. Your engagement fuels our mission to uncover cinema's hidden histories. So ring the bell and stay tuned. What star's story shocked you most? Let us know below. Until next time, keep questioning the myths behind the magic.